Welcome everybody to the Depths of Motherhood podcast. This is a special season dedicated to the tribe of the mother, but also I know any mothers listening will find this extremely valuable. I've created each episode to offer simple, digestible, and supportive information, which I hope will educate and inspire anyone who listens. So this is by popular demand. Please help us to educate and support the tribe holding the mother. Look forward to passionate and highly knowledgeable guests dedicated to reclaiming the essence of birth and embracing conscious parenting. Throughout our time together, our guests will serve as the guiding voices, illuminating the path towards a deeper understanding of preconception, pregnancy, birth, and postpartum. This is with the mother and the baby being the center of the exploration. In the show notes, you'll discover the link to Nourish Mother package, which will offer many different resources to complement each episode. This is free for all members in the Women's Circle, or £33 for everybody who just wants to purchase the package. A heartfelt thank you to our incredible guests and immense gratitude to my partner for supporting me on this creation. And finally, last but not least, special thank you to Araya, my daughter, for being the endless well of inspiration. Welcome everybody. Today we are joined by Uma Dismotuli. Uma is so passionate and experienced in yoga therapy and women's health. And since then, she has devoted her life to this practice, teaching since 1994 and becoming such an inspiration to so many women. Uma's extensive work in yoga therapy for women's health is highlighted through her 4 books, including Yoni Shakti, which I'm always talking about. Uma's expertise combines traditional teachings with contemporary insights. In addition to her books, Uma's developed an extensive library of Yoga Nidra recordings. I'll leave the link in the show notes so you can go and listen for absolutely free. I first met Uma in 2017 during a retreat that she was holding in London. And I've spoke about this before on the podcast, but this space that she created literally felt like we were being held by the womb. For that week, I just spent my time being so cozy on my mat with lots of blankets and cushions, and it was the first time in forever that I had given myself that time to slow down, to receive, and to just be. And I fell in love with what she was sharing, and I also fell in love with myself. I started to understand what loving myself really meant. It wasn't just going out for a nice cup of herbal tea or having a Epsom salt bath. It was so much deeper than that. This really marked a significant point on my timeline because it really planted the seed for so many threads that I have been on in my life since and will continue to go on. In this beautiful conversation that we created, we're really talking about the transition to motherhood and how it has shifted over the years from being a community-based rites of passage to a more isolated and solitary experience. Uma's teachings offer a bridge back to these time-honored practices, offering a guide to reconnect with ancient wisdom that nurtures both the current generation and those yet to come. She has an extensive knowledge on how humanity has unfolded over the years and is able to guide our awareness to systems which have attempted to take our power away, to separate us. And I feel through this conversation, it is this heart-opening exploration of how we can make these adaptations in our life which guide us back to our heart and surround us with people that see us, that love us, that are really on our team. In the show notes, you'll be able to find all Uma's links and information so that you can connect with her. And I know in our own women's circles, whenever we do Yoga Nidra, I am just like showered with so much gratitude. It is something that so many of us are craving, the moments to recharge, to come to stillness. So let's take a moment to come to land in the space in our body with the next breaths. Notice where the inhale comes to land in your body. Notice when you exhale, you can soften them areas of unnecessary tension. A gentle smile might come to your face as you welcome in the women that have been before you as you celebrate the ones that are yet to come. Feel that release across the chest and the back of the body and underneath the armpits as you take your breaths in with the intention to come to this moment in full presence. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you to Uma for spending this time with me creating this beautiful episode. Welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm delighted to be able to have the opportunity to speak with all the listeners, and I'm sure our conversation will be of interest to them. Thank you. I'm honoured.
They asked for it, so here we are. And I just want to say how this is so amazing for me, for my younger self, and for me today, because you, Uma, was the woman who guided me back to myself. I went to one of your retreats, 5-day retreat in London. I keep saying it's 2017, but I'm not 100% sure, because between that date and now, it's been quite a journey. I remember I had your big red book, Yoni Shakti. I had this before the retreat, and I read through every single page, and it just, wow, my cells just woke up. I'd never experienced this before, because anyone's listened to this podcast knows that my background's from a military background, and I was always surrounded by men. I'd been on the pill since I was 14 years old, constantly, never had a period. So the interesting thing was, when I got your book, it was actually a time I came off the pill, and then I separated from my husband at the time. And then in circle, I bled. I wasn't ready to bleed then, but I bled about 2 weeks before I was expecting it. And I wasn't the only person. There were women around me bleeding. And I was just like, what is this magic? And that, like, I get goosebumps right now. And you introduced me to the Yoni egg, and there were so many things that I was learning about how I could truly nourish myself and get to know myself as a woman. And I just remember crying so much. And then I went back to the military with all the men, and I just couldn't stop saying Yoni and cunt. I was like, yeah, listen to me. Since then I've gone much deeper into it, but I was just so excited to share what I was learning and so proud of it. So thank you so much. And I always pass your book on to everyone that I know. It always comes up as the first thing in my circle is this is what I was into when I transitioned back to myself. So thank you, Uma. And I'd love for you to share a little bit about how you came to doing this work and everything that you're creating in the world.
Oh, blessings. I remember that retreat very well. And I do want to say that the magic of synchronous menstruation is one of the kind of key ways that our physiology enables us to build these connections pretty much effortlessly. Because when we come into connection, even often menopausal women, or if you haven't bled for a while, or like you'd been off on the pill's own way of managing these things. So actually when we come together, we are actually an ecosystem of womanhood. It's an interconnected, physiologically trackable process where we're actually able to support each other, and it helps each other, because if you're isolated with this process, even of menstruation, that it's very, well, it doesn't make a lot of sense, actually. Do you know what I mean? If it's just you this happening to you, and like you were in a situation where it was a lot of men. I remember the note I received afterward from you, and I've never forgotten it, my love. It touched me very deeply, and I'm glad that the work you're doing is reaching other people. The way I came into it was I'd been fortunate enough to be introduced to yoga by my mum inadvertently, because she watched the telly. So she was watching a telly program with yoga on it. She chose to watch it, but I was about 4 years old at that point. So that was 1969, because I'm really quite old. So that it's been part of my life ever since, and I was introduced to it as a kind of natural thing that arose. So it was always part of my life. So that was my practice of my own that came from when I was a child. And I was also fortunate enough to grow up in the 1970s, where we had like student grants and things like this. So I was able to go to college on a free ride, basically, because if you got a place, it would get funded. And so I was able to use my educational privilege of which I'm very much aware no one in my family had ever been to university before, but in the 1970s and 80s you could go. So I went, and I was fortunate enough to connect with teachers in London to do my own degree studies, but also to do a yoga therapy training. And it was when I did that, I'd always done fairly standard yoga, whatever was available, and also what I made up for myself as a child. I had this little book from the TV series. It was called, if you're interested, Yoga for Health, with Richard Hittleman, whose books were good. And there was a book of the TV series, which I had, Thames TV, because we were in London. And so that was always part of my life. But the yoga therapy training helped. I had to do special projects, and it helped me realize how unsuitable a lot of yoga was for mothering, because I then myself was pregnant. So I did my project on postnatal recovery for my yoga therapy diploma. And I was fortunate enough to connect with Françoise Friedman, who is the founder of the Birthlight organization, through my yoga therapy training. So that was the intersection. And what I realized in brief is that a lot of the really good stuff we can do in yoga therapy, which does not look like the kind of yoga you get in a gym, it's often very restful and very nourishing, that all of those good things weren't really intersecting with this world of cyclical wisdom, of women's wisdom. And I was a feminist from when I could speak, basically. I'm fortunate to have encountered that sense of injustice about misogyny, and to realize that that's intersected with every other kind of oppressive regime that there is, including colonial extractive capitalism and racism. They're all intersected. So my journey as an educator and as a mother are kind of tied up. Because as I learned things that were useful for me, I realized they needed to connect, so that the good yoga therapy techniques could reach the women in the women's circles I was in. And I connected with people who were teaching cyclical wisdom, like through Red School and other ways of connecting, and realizing that this is basically indigenous wisdom, in the terms that it's in our bodies. And even if people have been removed from their origins, they're in a settler colony, or their people have been enslaved or displaced or something, together, if we connect to the wisdom of the bodies with respect and kindness, especially during motherhood, we have an incredible, it's like a gift that we can share that helps reconnect others. And so it's a kind of witchcraft, which is political and embodied and totally dedicated to mother, like not necessarily the mother as in your mother or my mother, but God bless them, but like in terms of the Mother Earth, and all that brings us together as humans when we actually listen to the cycles of our lives. Like, we live on a spinning globe. How could anything run on straight lines? Only if you try very hard and run an empire through it. But if people listen to the sleep cycles, to the digestive cycles, to the menstrual cycles, and to the amazing things which I think are super magical powers of lactation and pregnancy and birth and postnatal recovery, and now I work a lot with menopause, I think together we do have access to what would actually, liberate everybody. And all our liberations are intertwined. Like, it's actually really important that we honor people's choices not to get pregnant, not to be a mother, to connect with their menstrual cycles in ways that they actually engaged with, like that are fully embodied wisdom, to actually understand it. Because there's so much shame and ignorance. And sometimes I feel that kind of menstrual shame and ignorance is at the heart of a whole lot of sufferings. And that's how my work evolved, because I was going through pregnancy, postnatal recovery. I was a breastfeeding counselor. I've had 5 pregnancies, got 3 kids, and it's always been at the heart of my work. So even though I'm doing loads of menopause work, I still run the Empowered Birth course, which is all about yoga therapy techniques for empowered birth and postnatal recovery, because it's very dear to my heart. Because if we support the mothers, the heart of our humanity is uplifted by the way that we treat the mothers and the babies. And that's probably quite a lot to say in answer to how I got into it. But I was looking for support for my own experiences, and I found it in circles of other women, and was very, very well supported by breastfeeding counselors, by the people at Birthlight, by the people in my community, because I set out to serve them. So when I was in South London for 10 years, most of the work we did was involving mothers and their families and their babies and their grannies, because we put mothers at the center of what we were doing. Yeah. And I always like to make all the spaces really accessible and open, because I found as a woman with like breastfeeding or pregnant or postnatal, you weren't really welcome in a lot of the healing places, the yoga places I was in. So I set out to change that.
That's so powerful. Thank you for sharing. As you're speaking about this, you know, like the magic within, coming back to your body, it's so true from my own experience that all these tools have guided me back to a wisdom. So let's get on to this transition into motherhood, because I feel for myself, it was quite a wake-up call. I thought that because I'd spent so much time crossing this bridge into womanhood. I had done lots of work. I'd sat with my body. I had done so much, exactly, so much doing. But when I transitioned into motherhood, I realized that I was still very much holding on to my maiden self. And there was so much resistance, to the point that I was like, I don't want to be here. Like, I don't want to do this anymore. I want to run away. I want to go and be free, like into the sunset. And I really, really struggled. So I felt like I was just in limbo, constantly trying to be the mother that I believed in, that I valued, but at the same time being pulled so strongly back into maidenhood.
Yeah, the transition is part of the cycles of our lives, the transition from girlhood into womanhood at menarche. And that process, it's like enables us, if we do it in a way that's conscious, to get skills to help us make the next transition. Okay, so if you've had some support that enables you to really understand quite what's arising, not just physiologically, not just practically, but at a level of, it's actually spirit, it's a soul calling. You know, you're in that body and these things are arising so that you can actually pay attention to how you're part of these cycles of life, and the bleeding is all part of it and all. However, if we've not received the support to do that, when we come to the next transition, which is maybe into our sexual powers, maybe into motherhood, maybe those two things happen at the same time, who knows? There's lots of different transitions, but the transition to motherhood is very hard to manage if we haven't already acquired the wisdom of understanding the cycles. And although you know we do lots of work on these things, but if it's not in our culture to respect those things, and we're expected to show up in the military or in our job or the corporate world or in the education sphere or healthcare, none of these ways of being, not even our legal system or any kind of government system, respects the need for cyclical wisdom to be honored as the law of this planet, right? People need to pause. They need to take time if they're bleeding. They need to be honored and get maternity leave if they've had a baby. They need space to engage with their menopause, grief, the cycles of grief. And all of these things aren't really recognized as being real, but they're not built into our systems of how we pay people or how we organize our employment structures and timetables in schools and things like this. If we've grown up in a culture that basically negates the vital reality of respect for these cycles, and then we find ourselves at the threshold of a really big cycle of change, we have not got the tools to do it. Also, because of the economic structures we live from other women. So often, I saw that as a breastfeeding counsellor in London, you get people who are busy trying to mother these little human infants, one adult human, one human infant. That is a nightmare combination that is guaranteed to drive the adult human totally crazy, because it can't be done. It takes a village, literally. And so I was attending to people in all over South London whose aunties and grannies and mothers all lived in Canada and Japan and Australia and wherever they were. You know, they weren't round the corner to pop round and do what I was doing as a breastfeeding counsellor, which is say, do you want a cup of tea? Have you eaten anything today? Do you want me to hold the baby while you have a shower? Have you actually had a shit without some little person like being hanging off your tit while you do it? I mean, I'm just being really ridiculous. And people have no preparation or understanding of this, because there may have been a massive shift because of economic imperatives that are inhuman, to separate people from the families that they need to support their own family. And so people get depressed and anxious. And that's quite a natural, healthy, sane response to an entirely insane system, right? So motherhood doesn't exist out of connection to all the other systems in which we live, economic and cultural systems that are actually really in denial of the needs of the deep feminine, and they're basically not in support of life. So you'd see people isolated from their family support networks, in economic need for their partner. If they were lucky to go out to work, they'd be left on their own. I don't know quite what your situation was, but that often happened. And anybody who spends 24 hours a day being the sole carer for a human infant will actually find it incredibly difficult to be like that. You need to pass them around. It's not good for the human infant. So I felt, I just think that's an important thing to be aware of. And if you look at it at the level of like economics or like the physicality of it, after giving birth, you need support. Most wise, life-affirming indigenous wisdom systems, and I'm thinking of things like Ayurveda and Chinese medicine and a lot of the North African practices around postnatal recovery, and in many other places around the world, what you get is a reverence for those 40 days after birth, where the most extraordinary thing has happened to that body to bring through, and she needs to be held and cared for and nourished and loved and fed, and their primary energy of that birth giver needs to be with the baby that's been born, so that everyone else can hold them, not literally come around and hold the baby while the mum goes and makes everybody frigging lunch and hoovers around and panic that everyone's going to see the mess of your house. That's the kind of situation I saw, and I was like, no, this is not sane. And to expect for mothers to be in anything other than like terrible depression, anxiety, and possibly anger, psychosis, those things are perfectly natural responses to a very, very inhuman and insane system that I do hope we're beginning to see the end of, as people wake up and say, this isn't sustainable. It's unhealthy. It's also quite unrealistic. And if you're looking at sustainable resources, like things like breast milk and nurture, right? These are important resources as humans, and they're not nurtured in any way. A lot of places in the world, people don't get paid. I mean, some places we do. Flag up Norway, Sweden, you get some kind of maternity leave. In the UK, you get zero in corporate America. Canada's a different matter, but like there's so little recognition of the need for like economic, emotional, physical support, nutritional support, psychic support, from usually that would have been given by your mothers and aunties and grandmas, but a lot of people aren't living in any connection with that. So when you break up the ecosystem of womanhood, you literally break our hearts and our bodies. And I'm not going to get into the levels of obstetric violence and post-traumatic stress disorder that happen after so many births within the system, because I mean, although that is my remit to equip people to have skills to engage with that, there are other people doing that work. And I really recommend connecting with people like Kemi, with a K, Birth Joy Johnson. And she was a midwife within the NHS, and Kemi and other birth keepers have needed to separate themselves from that system to commit themselves to educating people what's necessary. So I want to stay in my lane and talk about yoga therapy and motherhood, but I really want to flag up that if there's one thing useful we can do, is we can uplift the work of those who've been in those systems. Because if you're looking at transitioning to motherhood, it's not very helpful to come out of a hospital totally broken, possibly abused, having experienced violent systems that try to make you feel grateful for the help that they've done to save your baby. And I'm not saying that the life-saving care people get with the necessary emergency C-sections and other things are really valuable and important. What I'm saying is that most births actually don't need to be held in those systems. Or when you try and fit that kind of amazing transition into a system with protocols and with people who've never seen what it's like, a lot of new midwives have never seen somebody laboring under their own steam and energy, so they actually don't know how to deal with it. So I bless and give thanks to people who are doing that important work, because we mustn't let go of that knowledge. And it's still here. My granny was a midwife in Ireland and had responsibility for many terrible things that happened in Ireland, because that was the birthplace of active management of labour in the hospital she worked in Dublin, in Holles Street. And so I don't know how you feel about these things, but I feel we do have it in our epigenetics to know how to give birth.
Yeah.
We need to support each other to remember that, and to distinguish between when people actually need emergency medical care and when they just need love, nurture, and proper women-focused midwifery, which is mostly, I was very fortunate with my births to be able to access with midwives who trained in other places in the world. So midwives who trained or connected with traditional birth keeping practices in Ethiopia, in Mexico, in India. They have a different perspective.
And I was interviewing an Andean midwife, and she shared so beautifully about how, you know, traditionally they're taught to hold the space, to not to intervene unless necessary. And when the mother looks into the midwife's eyes, it's like a saying, it's okay. It's like an anchor almost to say you're doing okay. And the woman will look for the midwife to see if there's anything that she needs to be concerned about. And I actually take that into when I do my own women's circles. It's like you're a midwife for the circle. You're just holding the space, guiding the energy back if you need to, but not trying to fix or intervene unnecessarily. And I think not just circles, but it's any relationship in life. And I love the way that you've guided us to this point through the conversation of being like, when we start to become more acquainted with our body, we understand her language, we honor the cycles, it guides us into the next phase of our life. Because I'd missed so many years of following my cycle, even with the amount of knowledge I had, I wasn't embodied enough. So I could talk the talk, but when I was in the moments of transition, I felt completely lost because I didn't have the roots with it. I just had the knowledge, but for everyone who knows, who's gone through these transitions, it's like the mind melts away and you're left with what is there. And I felt like I couldn't hold on to my knowledge. I didn't have it rooted within me. So I actually, when I gave birth, I was planning to have a home birth. I did 24 hours. And then the last part, now I realized I was in transition. When I actually started to come around, I was like, shit, like what is happening? I was so full of fear. There was just my partner there. And he's like, magically now this midwife or something offering me a coffee, and I'm like, no, like I need something else. So I go to hospital and I experienced the things that you were talking about. And for me, like I took a lot for me to process this, but I know that it was for the reason that it humbled me and it helped me to meet the situation more deeply, to show up for other women and families, to not forget that this still exists. Like, I mean, it's here in most experiences that I've listened to, especially my friends and family in the UK, of people intervening in these transitions when it's not necessary, and really taking our magic away from these moments. And not there's nothing that I was taught growing up to be able to stay in the face of things that feel uncomfortable, that maybe seem painful. It was always to run away or distract or to fix. And so now learning all this is, how can I show up? And I think that was my massive lesson going into motherhood, was I can't run away anymore, because the child in me wanted to run away, but I couldn't. I had a child that I had to be here for. So I'm learning, like, every day, show up, stay. And that's like a mantra in my head, is like, you can stay through this, like you have the strength. And so all of these things start to come back together, and it's making more and more sense with the things that I'm learning. And so for anyone listening to this right now, I know that it can sound overwhelming, and that's why we're being called forward to step up and to know we do have the strength. You have got this, and sometimes it will be tough and exhausting, but this is why we have tools to be able to calm our nervous system, to rest. Like Uma teaches so much about yoga nidra, which I absolutely love. It's something that, you know, I had to learn this lesson of rest. So I'm wondering how we can, with all these things that you've just shared, Uma. Big shout out to our sponsor, Evolving Humans, who are the pioneers for energy healing. This practice that I was taught 4 years ago has been studied by researchers all around the world to provide evidence of the physiological effects of energy healing. And I'm not just saying this because it's a promotion, but I have used this practice every single day for 4 years, and personally I've noticed the most impact in my emotional state. This energy practice taught me how to feel energy in my body and observe the sensations. The technique involves you using your hand and connecting to the energy field within your body. And with this gentle, loving awareness that you bring to the table, everything is seen and lived. The whole being comes into alignment. During the birth of my daughter, I tore, and the discomfort that I was experiencing with this tear started to ease up dramatically when I would use this technique. In the show notes, you'll find the link to Evolving Humans so that you can explore this healing technique, which is available through a course that you can join today. With all these things that you've just shared, Uma, how do you think that we can rise up for these situations to be able to support the mother through these transitions?
That's a very good question. And my honest sense at this point is that the most powerful force on earth is the connection that we have with the life that's in us. So long as we're alive, we're connected, and all these cycles of menstruation and motherhood and maintenance, they're moving through us. And the most powerful thing we can do is help people remember that within them is the power of earth, of life, of their ancestors, of all of the interconnectivity of life. And when people have felt that, and usually I think it takes, like, I don't know what it is. Some people are just born connected. They don't need to be woken up. It's not even a wake, it's a remembering. Because if we have to go out there and teach people what to do, that's not going to stick. As you say, when push comes to shove, right, you're not going to remember anything in your prefrontal cortex. That's a new kid on the block, that part. You can't think your way out of labor or of intense pain in illness or in grief or anything that's you can't think. You've got to feel your way through it. So most of the practices I teach, which are the opposite of a lot of yoga, which is all about ascension, is to come down into our hearts and into our bodies, to recognize that mostly we're exhausted as a species because we've believed that we've got to keep up with this capitalist machinery we've created, whether we're mothers or maidens or crones or whatever. We're all, and to recognize with that exhaustion, that through the exhaustion we get disconnected from our cycles of wellness, like our sleep gets screwed up, our digestion is a mess, we need help with menstruation and menopause and birth, because all these cyclical processes, like our immune system, our creative process, they're all over the shop. People don't know which way is up. So the most but when we're connected, we are powerful, and then we reconnect with all the other people who are like, it's like a mycelial network, one heart at a time. I feel and remember your connection, and you make connections with others. And even though it seems slow, it's happening in a lot of different places at a lot of different times with a lot of different people. And the most powerful thing we can do is to keep in our hearts and to keep human, and to feel that when we see, terrible things happening in the world, that's not separate from us. And when we see things happening around motherhood and birth or breastfeeding or menopause, these things are not separate. They're all part of a really enormous network that's heart to heart, and it's passed through bodies. Like you described the way that you stepped into the circle with me, and whenever it was 2017 or something, and you could feel that your blood was like tugged by the other people in the room. Or our heart goes out to people when we feel things. These are embodied experiences. We cry when we see something terrible happening to children on the other side of the world. And we're not to compartmentalize those things, to welcome it all in. And the most powerful thing we can do is help people remember that these signs of our cyclical wisdom, our blood and our tears and our grief and all of these things, they reconnect us to life. They reconnect us to other humans. And that's powerful. And then it enables us to get through our cycles, and we then model like the resilience, because we go through shit and things are shittier than they need to be, because these systems that are very oppressive, including the way a lot of medical approaches to motherhood infantilize people. They say, you don't have any wisdom, you've got to do it this way. Here's the schedule of feeding, vaccinating, hydrating, exercising, educating your children, whatever it is they tell you. A mother's wisdom is really profound because it's rooted in this embodied connection. So I think all I'm trying to say is that we need to help. The best thing we can do is remember for ourselves and to know that it's real. And we're at the end of a long line of ancestors who are incredibly happy that we're still alive. They all gave birth. And if we're talking about motherhood, there's mother lines back. And we're here now, remembering who we are. We can help others remember. And surprisingly enough, it requires less effort than people think. It mostly requires people just to take enough rest to go, oh, my days, I am so exhausted. And ask questions, things like, why did I let myself get like that? How could it be so shit? I wanted to have this child and I thought it was going to be marvelous, and this is just one world of pain. Why is it like this? And the moment you start asking why and remembering how you are, you go back into the extraordinarily powerful political systems that have created structures of education and military structures and legal structures, and all of those are educational structures, and none of them are intended to do anything other than to control and make us to forget. Sit in the classroom and don't ask questions, be quiet. It's very, the military model is used in a lot of our educational and employment places. You're going to take a break at this time and all that stuff. So it's quite a long answer to your question, but I just think that is the most powerful thing to do, is to let people have strategies to feel that it's absolutely valuable for them to take rest if they're ill, to take rest, to sleep, to be nourished, and that helps us reconnect. And when we remember that, we remember the immense power. And some of us are fortunate to get to feel that power in the form of like birth. You're like, well, if you can do that, you can do friggin' anything. I just think that what that you talked about, a sort of tribe of motherhood, people who've had that experience and other experiences. That's not the only way to it, you know. But because there are very young people who've never encountered those experiences who are totally remembered. They've remembered who they are and they don't like what's happening. And when that happens, you cannot not see that or feel it. It's in your body, and your body's giving you goosebumps and shivers and trembles, and your body is talking to you, and that's life force, and that's the most powerful thing in the world. And we live on the earth, and that's her law, isn't it? So that's what I think we can do, whatever techniques we have, you know. And women's circles are part of that, where we don't try to fix anybody, we hold a space to listen, we let all that needs to be said be said. And I have been doing that work now for nearly 25 years. And every single time we step into circle, you have to surrender to the idea that I'm in charge. It's not like somebody's in charge of the circle. And to be aware of if listening in to people's bodies is the key powerful thing. And then they reconnect. And then all kinds of magic happens. Like people go off and start podcasts that help reawaken connections. People discover all sorts of ways. And then when we're very powerful. Yeah.
Wow. I absolutely
can't rise, but we can't rise up if we're tired.
Right, exactly. It's that simple.
In the States, and that's her tagline, rise up rested. Karen Brody says that, is that like nobody can be rising up against systems of oppression if you haven't got the energy. If you're tired, you'll be numb and disconnected, and you'll be able to sort of divide everything up and say that's nothing to do with me. Whereas if you've got energy and you're rested, then we rise up together, because this isn't an individual thing, this is a collective. And within the collective are these little circles and tribes that all intersect. Solar mothers are one of them. Oh, circles of power.
So when we talk about this, what really comes up for me is that we have all of our time has been pulled away into systems, so we don't get the opportunity to rest, and we are encouraged through our life to separate. Like if we think about it, from being separated from our menstrual cycle, to having our experience of birth taken away, to having our child take away as soon as they come earthside, to going back to work so quickly, from fathers being separated, to all of that journey all the way through. it makes me feel so sad, but also at the same time, we can show up and we can reclaim this. And I'm wondering if you could share some things that the tribe might notice when witnessing the mother go through in her postpartum, where there might be signs to say, this woman, this mother needs to rest, and just a simple way to guide her back to her body, to encourage her to rest.
I think the key thing is that when you hear those kind of, they're often external voices of our own disempowerment of self, like, I can't do this, I can't do this, I'm too small for this, I can't handle it, or actually voicing the truth, like, this is crazy, I can't do it, or I'm crazy. When people are just in emotional states and they can't stop crying, or they're being really erratic, or often some of the signs that we're trying to keep control, like OCD, classic sign. People get completely obsessed with cleaning the bottles if they're bottle feeding, or obsessed with the laundry process. The tiny micromanagement of things you think you can control gets way out of hand. There are funny little signs in people's behavior. They might be presenting in that way that seems like, oh, they're really on it because the house is really clean, or, oh, they're really not on it because everything's a total chaotic mess. Actually, the person with the obsessive cleaning process might actually be the one who's in deep need. But it'll depend on that person's constitution, on their mental makeup, on what happened to them before. The key thing we can do is simply get them back in their bodies. And that goes for any, because it could be that they're in post-traumatic stress because of their birthing experience, or because of what's happened to them even after the most positive birth experience. People can crash or spiral out into complete euphoria. So all existing mental health imbalances, which are often a sign of trying to adjust to an insane society, all of that, you can go into that. But the simple thing we can do with all of that is get people back into their bodies, give them, cook for them, let them be held so that they know they can rest. Say, I've got a baby, you can rest. Make a point of allowing everyone to recognize the need for that mom, just even to take an, I've got gazillions of free yoga nidra practices on the Yoga Nidra Network site in 23 different languages. You can just download one of those and listen. But basically what Yoga Nidra is doing is giving you the opportunity to let that cyclical process of restoration and repair that happens when we go into sleep, is kind of hacking into that. So often people will listen to something like that, and if they haven't been able to go to sleep, they'll drop into sleep. Or if they haven't got time for a long sleep, or their sleep was disturbed, you can pick up a bit of extra of the repair processes of sleep with a yoga nidra in the afternoon or in the middle of the night when you can't back to sleep. So I have yoga nidra as a go-to tool that I like to give away for free. Obviously, you can purchase all sorts of yoga nidras from that site, but like, actually, if we see someone spinning out in any of those ways that I've described, it's actually a really useful tool. And to just, and you know, and to be nourished, you know, to actually have someone cook for you. But I live in a little town where there's a lot of very consciously supportive networks for families, a lot of young families, and people will often set up a little rota. Someone will take charge of mothering the mother. That's what basically needs to happen. And yoga nidra is like a mother who'll be like, now Danielle, you know, it's time for you to settle down and sleep. I'm going to watch out for you. You don't worry. I'm watching everything. Here's the blanket. Here's your pillow. You want a hot water bottle. It's that kind of energy, but as a spiritual practice. So people often might feel a bit guilty because we've got that kind of white perfectionist nonsense that you've got to keep going until it's all perfect. It will never be perfect. And that is a terrible, guilty thing to take rest or to even express that you're tired. And there's so much good work going on in this, and yoga nidra is a really helpful part of that. I hope that's a good answer, because it's very, very simple.
That's wonderful. And I'm really brought in that feeling of guilt. That's one that I felt inside myself, and I've heard from many mothers, is just this feeling to keep up.
Yeah.
One of the obvious ones would be to bounce back into your body. I feel like that is shifting in the groups that I'm in, to actually respect, to feel, okay, I've held this baby and now it's, I'm just coming back to nourish myself. But then there's these other guilts that come in of, well, am I doing enough? Am I showing up enough? Am I making these meals that are Instagram worthy? And I think the mind can go on and on and on to reach this, what society thinks is perfection. But if you notice this, like I love that you said, notice what words are coming through, notice what your mind is guiding you to, because that can be a wake-up call to say, okay, I need to rest. I need to have some peace to come back to my body, to remember my truth, to remember my values about motherhood and taking care of myself. Because simply existing and nourishing yourself and knowing that having a calm nervous system is exactly what you and your baby need in these moments. And so it's a big job for the tribe in the sense that it might not be something that we're used to for many, to show up in a different way that is not just buying presents and gifts for the baby, but actually mothering the mother, as you said. I absolutely love that, because it's a different narrative from what we've been told. And this can all be woken up actually when the mother's in pregnancy, when what we used to call as baby showers, but as a mother's blessing, and starting to switch the narrative early on for the community to see, like, even though, yes, the mother is strong and she's so powerful, but she's coming into this point where she needs to be held and loved.
And it's good to know that as we share these things, we deepen into our own knowing. So, it's not everybody's cup of tea to sit down and read a big fat book, because Yoni Shakti is like nearly 700 pages long, but that's available too.
Yes.
And it's a good idea to try. I mean, just not just for myself, but generally speaking, there's so many people making good work in this field, and get it direct off them. Because if you go buy somebody's book that they've written and you buy it off, not only are you supporting, an organization that doesn't pay taxes and supports oppressive regimes of violence around the world, but the author or the musician, they're not going to see a penny of that. So I really encourage people, when we're sharing, this is a great resource, this is a good book, this person wrote that book, get into that person's website, buy it off them direct. You might have to wait a few more days because it will be them making up the parcel and taking it to the post office. But on the other hand, that person will get a fairer share of the profits that come from the efforts that they put into sharing their work. So one of the first books I wrote is called Mother's Breath. Mother's Breath exists only as an ebook and a set of audio downloads. And if you wanted something that would really give you specific, beautiful stories, and it's like, I wrote it after I had my second child, and it's called A Definitive Guide to Yoga Breathing and Yoga Therapy Practices for Birth, Labor, Postnatal Recovery, and Pregnancy and Mothering. So I really think, for the people listening now, I think probably the most useful thing I brought for you to look at is the Mother's Breath audios, and that's an ebook. It's very beautiful.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for that. I didn't know you had that, so that's great.
Oh, I'll send you the link to it as well. You can have a look. Yeah, it's very special. I wrote that one in, I think, about 2006, and I made the audio book for it. It's not an audio book, it's all the audio, and it's a really treasured resource. I haven't got the money to reprint it as a hardback book, unfortunately, but it is available as an ebook, and you can get audio down. Lovely. And it's lots of simple breathing practices taken from yoga therapy specifically for mothering. It's called Mother's Breath. It's a lovely book.
As you just say breath, I take a deep breath. Like, you've been bringing that, it's like,
yeah, because I mean, during pregnancy, the mother's breath is the child's oxygen supply. And then later, as we age and manage families, if the mother's breath is out of kilter, everybody else's nervous system is going to be shot. And if our breath is also our voice to speak up. So mother's breath is a really powerful kind of, it's not a concept, it's an experience that reconnects us in lots of ways to the importance of the primacy of, like, the mother's well-being at the heart of every family. And what you're doing is really beneficial to support those, and to know that it's not just valid, but it's vital we prioritize the health and well-being of mothers, because they're making the future.
Thank you, Uma. So where can we find you? Where are you hanging out?
There are 3 places for all the resources and the books. You just go to the yoganidranetwork.org. There's a shop, a lot of resources, all the articles and things. That's a really good resource, and you can get the books there. If you want to hang out with me on social media, you'll find me with my name, Uma Dinsmore Tooley, on Instagram and Facebook. And if you feel that you want to step into more intimate circles, I hold cyclical wisdom circles at all the Celtic holidays, and I offer daily yoga nidras on WhatsApp every day. And I do that in my Patreon. And that's really where I'm of deeper service to people, because it's a beautiful service. It's a subscription circle. It's very cheap. And the next one will be the next big Celtic holiday. I do solstices and things. And that's Uma Dinsmore Tully, and it's at Patreon, which is a subscription channel. So if you go up on Patreon and look for Uma Dinsmore, you'll find me, and Uma Dinsmore Tully on Patreon. So that's how I can be of most kind of like literally showing up in your phone every day saying, hey, Danielle, here's today's yoga nidra. Have you done that? I hold little circles. I found a way. I'm so grateful for this technology to do it online. So I've got lap circles. I've got Zoom meetings. I provide that sort of, that's where I do that in Patreon actually. And it's a joy to do that service.
Thank you so much. This has been such a gift for me. Thank you. And just for all the wisdom that is within you, that has come through today. I deeply appreciate it.
Thank you, Danielle, and thank you for your good work. I hope that strength and wellness support your excellent work in the world, and that everybody who's listening in can take nourishment. You really hearten people with the work that you do. That's so good. Thank you very much for inviting me.